Ultimately, the number one driver in culture is making sure that we're all aligned with our mission and what we're after. Welcome to the Menlo Experience. I'm your host, Brad Sant, here with Kyle Bach. And looking forward to this episode because I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about us as Super Bowl champions.
Back to back.
Back to back. And we're looking at a third time, right?
You know, back to back to back to back. How many backs did I just put in there?
4.
Back
That was
to
one.
back
I
to
like where your
back.
head's at, but
Yeah,
getting ahead of yourself.
I feel like that's where we're headed.
Yeah. So, I thought about this coming in today's podcast. Mid-season, we were talking about pros and cons and challenges and how is the offense doing without Bieniemy and what is an individual contributor versus a team? What's your take now that the season's over and obviously we know the result that happened, but what's your take on that?
I remember we talked about how they never stopped believing. And, if anything was more on display, I mean, they never gave up. They never stopped believing. And man, Patrick Mahomes is just a competitor. He is, I love Tyreek calls him 15 different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's just what a great nickname that, he's just different. And, you kind of see that on display and watching it now, looking back, I mean, it's pretty amazing. And yeah, I think that, coaching changes makes a big difference. But man, that's a pretty amazing game and watching them just compete.
Yeah, I think you've got with Mahomes and Kelsey and a couple other key individuals. I mean, Butker, just on fire with accuracy and stuff. But you've got key linchpins in the team that are stable year to year and
on both sides of the ball.
Both sides, yeah.
Yep.
And I think the thing that was interesting to me is some of the performers that were just not getting it done mid-season at all. Especially on the offense.
Yeah.
You're looking at they were some of those throughout the playoffs and in the Super Bowl that made the key plays of the game. Hardman coming in, making the game-winning catch, and all of that. I think it's a testament to just the team and staying together and believing in your mission.
I was reading something that MVS is the one who called that play or suggested
it. Yeah, I saw that.
So, which is such a cool picture of teamwork too. Mm-hmm. Here he is, not calling his own play, calling a play for another player.
Right.
And pretty amazing kind of see all those things start coming out.
So it's kind of interesting now that the season's over and we're in the off season. We're talking about trades and franchise tags and all that other stuff. Yeah. And that team you had now, suddenly there's a lot of different pieces moving. And some it may be time to move on from, some it may be time to double down on. But it kind of tied, in my mind, to some of the stuff we've been talking about in the business. Obviously, we're with our leadership team, we're reading a book called Necessary Endings, just together and some of that. But how does that tie with your view of that book and the message and, what the Chiefs are going through? And
I think it's amazing that in pro sports that's normalized, right? That there's a team and a season, and that team is rarely all together still. It's become more normalized. 20 years ago that was a different story where your same teams, stay in the same place for so long. But that's, professional sports, it's just so rare anymore. You have a couple of key players that stay, for that whole duration, but by and large, it's much more a rotation of people that help get a team to a certain point. And then it's new, there's constantly new people coming in as well. So there's some longevity, some, new players and the book that we're reading, is talking about that both on an employment side, but also just operations and systems and, other subcategories, is talking about like there's a beginning, but then there's necessary endings as well. And so I think as we talk about that with sports and business, there's, we had a great discussion as a management team talking about what are some of those necessary endings that we're facing as a company. And so I love the quote of, or the concept of pruning that they brought up in the book. And it talks about how for pruning, there's 3 different categories. Do you remember what they were?
Oh, I don't have them yet. Is this a test?
It is a test. Yes. Everything is a test.
Well, normally the teacher gives you like a heads up, prepare. So this is
100%. Look at that piece of paper sitting in front of you.
Yeah.
No, it's so 3 different types of pruning. You prune something that's dead, right? So a dead branch, it's something you cut off. A branch that's dying is something that you might cut off as well. But then it talks about pruning. A master pruner is going to be somebody that prunes off something that's growing, but pulling resources from something else that could it be, if you reallocate those resources to one focused direction, you can get a singular bloom, and things like that. And so cutting off something that's actually alive right now, but pulling resources. And so it's all about resource allocation and focus, and what is the purpose here. And so you and I have had some big conversations around this topic over the last couple of weeks. But when you think about pruning, what's
Hold
your
on, that was
oh,
two. That was two.
oh no,
Dead. Oh, dead
dying.
dying. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Three,
Dead
dead
dying
dying, still
and
growing,
still growing.
still
Okay. Got it.
alive.
All right.
Yeah,
Good summary.
but just pulling
Okay.
resources
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. No, I appreciate trying
Just
to
distinction.
keeping
Yeah.
me
I'm
honest
keeping
there.
it on.
I
Okay.
appreciate that. And but yeah, when you think about pruning in business, why is that hard? Whether that's personnel, whether that's a customer base, whether that's a client, whether that's just it's sometimes a division within a company. Why do you think pruning is so hard?
Yeah. I think I'm thinking back to an earlier podcast we had on a little bit of this topic, but sometimes you're so invested in things, and it's hard to let go, especially if there's any signs of life.
Yeah.
And I think as leaders, we've talked about this a lot. As leaders, you take a lot of pride in being able to take a resource of some type, whether it's a human resource or a business division or whatever, and grow that, right? And
Yeah.
that's can get in the way of, maybe it's an ego thing or something like that. But as a leader, you don't want to let go of that. You find pride, or you really love the stories when you can take something that maybe not performing well, and really get it there. But
Yeah.
the other thing I think is sometimes it's just hard to see. Sometimes you're too close to it. And I feel like, we had a discussion in our leaders meeting the other day that I was coming in from the outside, and I
Yeah.
really didn't have as much background and context. And it was really easy for me to see
Yeah.
some of the things that we weren't letting go, or pruning
Yeah.
in various areas. So some of it's proximity, I think, and too close, and then some of it's probably ego, or having trouble letting go. But
Yeah.
like that book talks about, it's not bad necessarily. It's an ending is just an ending a lot of times. It doesn't mean it's a good ending, a bad ending. And in some ways, whether it's a business division that's not working well or whatever, it feels a lot better once that's gone. And I think, again, back to that earlier podcast, we talked about celebrating the death of that,
Yeah.
celebrating when you're letting go of something.
Yeah.
So you have a full opportunity to kind of process whatever emotions are there, and deal with that, and move on. But it needs to be seen as a positive, and a leadership skill to prune. And I think that's a lot of why we're talking about this in our leadership team with this book, because holding on to things too long will not get you in good places really fast.
Yeah. I love that the concept is, we the first chapter talked about how we have a natural aversion to ending anything. And so we naturally want to, give it one more day, give it one more week, or, see if we can improve things. And we almost view ending things as quitting, or as a failure. And so rather than seeing it as a new opportunity for a new beginning, we tend to see the negative side of any transition like that. And, and we see, I love the quote that the book talked about. There's a difference between hurt and harm also, and that sometimes there's necessary hurt to go through for health. It was funny. We were reading that book as I had a root canal crown fall out the other day, which my 8-year-old thought was hilarious, by the way, because I had this huge hole in my mouth. Also found out that my wife did not know that I had a fake tooth, even though there's facts.
She loves you for who you are.
She loved me for who I was, but she didn't know. So
maybe
I
she
guess
did then.
maybe she, now we will find out.
Okay.
But I think she still loves me. So, but so I had that tooth fall out, had to go to the dentist. It's necessary, hurt in order for health. When they had to do the dental work, and I won't describe that in detail, but it's putting a screw into my head, right? And it's like, but that's necessary pain in order for, for me to be able to move on in a healthy way. And I think as we look at pruning, and as we look at endings like that, sometimes it's painful, and it's, those transitions are tough. And when I think about the Chiefs, right? Hardman might not be on the team again, right?
Yep.
And, and some of those type of things where it's like, okay, so he's already left once, and, now he's, maybe leaving again. And those are tough, because those are, people that, on that team, they all cared about each other, right?
Yep.
Like they're all, friends, and many of them will still be friends afterwards, right? But just might not be playing on the same team. So
It's interesting you bring up quitting. And I think, an ending can feel like quitting a lot. And I don't know about you, but my upbringing a lot of times was
yeah,
don't quit, keep at it,
yeah,
don't give up,
don't
don't
give
give up,
up.
don't give up. And there's ways that can be really healthy. And just
Yeah,
as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of people that are starting businesses or whatever give up too early.
yeah,
And it's actually the ones that keep going longer and
yeah.
persist that actually end up being successful. And so it's really this imperfect balance that
Yeah.
you have to try and find and go with. Sometimes it's a gut feel. Sometimes you got extra data that helps you kind of illustrate that, but sometimes you just don't know, and
Yeah.
you have to make the best decision
I
in
think
front of
I
you.
think you're right. It's the juxtaposition of those two things, right? Because you ultimately you have sometimes that you have to push through. It's the founder starts something because nobody believes it's possible, right? And so they have to push through these barriers that, to start something new out of nothing. And yet, you watch Shark Tank, right? And I know you and Carter are
Carter's
watching.
favorite new show is
Yeah,
Shark Tank.
Carter's
So
your
yeah,
8-year-old's favorite new
yeah,
show, and it's but as you're watching Shark Tank, there's times where the sharks will literally tell them, "You need to stop doing what you're doing. You've invested $1 million into this product that nobody wants. Like you need to stop." And there's this quitting that's been discouraged for so long that giving up is, entrepreneurship is just all about, you know, never ever quitting. Like, well, that's not necessarily true, right? Entrepreneurship has to have pivoting left and right, right? And what we just like the word pivoting better, but pivoting is still quitting one direction and going a different
sure,
direction, right?
right.
And so, but for some reason, this idea of necessary endings, I think, is something that just we've just been slightly off as a culture, growing up and having that mentality. I remember that. Never give up,
Yep.
never quit.
Well, I think that gets me back to one of our values, and core value for me is being bold,
Yeah.
because you've got to make these decisions, especially as a leader. And if you haven't been in leadership, it's sometimes hard to understand what this feels like. But you've got to make bold decisions with the best information available. And sometimes that's quitting on something. Sometimes that's persisting on something. So
Mm,
I think what we're doing in the organization is actually really healthy in our leadership meetings by having multiple people in the room. So
yeah.
we can strengthen each other and really provide support for making that bold decision to continue, or we can look at it from the outside and say, I see where you're at, but it's really time to kind of hang that one up.
Yeah.
And it's not making a sole decision by yourself, but
Yeah.
certainly I feel that pressure a lot of times as the buck stops here. There is no
Yeah.
extended decision or anything like that. Ultimately, as we move forward, that's a heavy weight we carry, but you've got to take the best information and go with it and be bold. So,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
appreciate the other day when you kind of called me out on it, and I jokingly told you it was a mini rebuke, and but it was a healthy thing because, to your point, I was a group of us managers were all talking about some situations, and as we were talking about it, the idea made sense. And as we were talking about it, and we were talking about our path forward, and it was personnel related, and as we were talking about that, um, as we were all talking, it made sense, and it was so funny because you were out of town, and I was trying to not bother you, and then you got back into town, and were asking me about it, and you pulled out our core values,
Mhm.
and and look at we went down one by one and just talked about does this align with our vision and values here, and this decision that the three of you made, and as I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my gosh, like we just didn't even go back to the vision and
Yeah.
values. And and we missed it. And and we just and so when we talked it out then as a leadership team, the whole group talking about it, it was, just a whole different conversation. And I do think it's kind of a superpower of being on the outside and coming in. I think in some ways, when I've done consulting for other businesses, it's the same type of thing, right? You're this outside set of eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, that is a terrible idea. Like, and who authorized this? And usually it's like, someone on the executive team making this thing happen. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. We
Yeah.
should have cut this thing off a long time ago. And but being the outside coming in, it can be easy to also to just not speak up in that moment, right? So have you ever had times where you feel like you're holding back from speaking up in those moments, or do you feel like that's
It's a great
an
question.
easy thing for you to do? Because there's
Mhm.
a intellectual side, but then there's an emotional side of every one of these conversations as well, right?
Mhm.
And so do you feel like it's easy for you to speak up as in those moments, or do you feel like that's because you want to let people lead, but you want to how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to answer your question, I don't hold back usually. I mean, I for people that know me, I'm pretty quick to kind of let people know where my head is. But I think the real balance is in providing people autonomy and leaders to do their roles, and that's a little bit of where I wasn't telling you exactly what to do in that situation, but was at least from my perspective trying to keep the North Star. I think there's so
Yeah.
many companies or so many organizations that will sit around and they'll spend time and time and time, just crazy amounts of time developing these core values, and then they stick them in a drawer somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And I think the discipline of bringing that out and keeping everybody in focus and using that as our guiding light is important. And so it's not somebody's opinion. It's not I wasn't necessarily stating what I thought. It was me just questioning on, does this
Right.
align with where we're going to go as an organization? And I think quickly as we were going through that, it became apparent in a really big way that
Yeah.
it wasn't aligned, and
Yeah.
that's okay. But I think us continuing to have that and continuing to drive that, and when I am sitting here listening to the conversation, I'm thinking of culture. One of my core responsibilities is making sure our culture is aligned and going the way that we want to go as a company. And I think a lot of people think of culture as ping pong tables or stuff in the fridge and those sorts of things. And
Pickleball in the basement.
pickleball in a basement. I've heard
That's
you
right.
talk about that, but and those things are valuable in culture. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately, the number one driver in culture is making sure that we're all aligned with our mission and
Yeah.
what we're after. And so, being hyper vigilant and diligent on making sure that's the case.
Mhm.
And I think it's easy to sit in a room and come up with good ideas, right? We
Yeah.
could come up with great ideas. And I know you've got some quotes here from Jack Welch as we wrap this back to necessary endings. But at the end of the day, a business model or a division or something may have sounded great in a room with everything, but if it's in complete isolation or not going to the greater mission, then it's taking those resources. It's alive, like you were
Right.
talking about, but it's
Right.
starting to rob those resources. So,
Right.
I mean, what's your opinion on Jack Welch and how he handled GE?
Well, I think it's interesting. I was telling you that I got someone sent me a quote from a LinkedIn image the other day that was Jack Welch quote, and I thought it was ironic because the quote was it was something more inspirational on Jack Welch as opposed to knowing more of his story at GE. Where his nickname was Neutron Jack, right? Because he fired over 100,000, he laid off over 100,000 people during his time as a CEO, right, of 20 years. But he was averaging, that's 5,000 people a year that he was laying off from his company, and so they called him Neutron Jack for that. And but part of the inspirational quote that was kind of sent to me was much more about you focus on your own individual success, as you're growing as a leader, but then when you become a leader, you focus on other people's success, and that's true. But I love that it's a understanding the full picture of that level of leader and understanding that he's balancing the vision, the values, the core execution, the level of excellence at the entire organization. And one of their common practices that, when you're sharing an inspirational quote that maybe you miss a lot of times is they cut the bottom 10% of their staff every single year. And so part of their model was literally to look at everyone's execution levels and see how everyone's doing across all their data points. And they cut the bottom 10% performers every single year across the whole organization. And so, for me, I think it's an interesting understanding of, okay, we have such high standards that, the bottom 10% is just not the right fit. And they standardized it. And, in organizations today, we're watching lots of layoffs in the tech field and tech industry at, maybe record levels. I can't think of another time that they've maybe been this massive of layoffs, but
Were you born in 2000?
yeah, I was born in
Layoffs?
no,
Mm.
no,
You're pretty
I was
young.
earlier than
Yeah.
that, but
Oh, okay.
I wasn't born in 2000s. But yeah, so the 2000s layoffs might have been about the same. I just probably wasn't paying any attention to them. And so I would have been 16 at the time. So what were those like? Were they about the same?
Oh, it was wild. I mean, yeah, there was layoffs and companies going bust left and right,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I think you talk about necessary ending. Sometimes an investment is
Yeah.
you got to pull the plug, or that's a necessary ending as well. And I think when it comes to Jack Welch, there are things to take away that they did good at GE,
Yeah.
and just exactly copying another leader isn't a recipe for success either. Because the truth
Yeah.
is, how many leadership books are there? How many seminars are there on all of this stuff? And the reality as a leader is you have to make the best decision in front of you with the best information and your experience and all of these things coming together that may or may not be right.
Right.
But you got to make a decision. And a lot of times it's hard for people to understand where that's coming from because they don't have all of those pieces of information.
Yeah.
Whether it's, it could be in government, it could be in a company, it could be in somebody's home life.
Yeah.
But most of the time you have just a small snippet of what is really in front of somebody that's making that type of decision. So, I think the challenge is you can't make that decision always trying to please everybody either.
Yeah.
You've got to make it, and this is again, be bold with that decision for what what your convictions are, what you're after, and trying to achieve. I think this is an interesting bird walk because it's something else I wanted to talk about today that kind of came up in the last week, which is this. We're talking about pruning. We're talking about maybe how do we kind of move on from some things in life that are not maybe providing fruit.
Yeah.
But what I noticed in the last week too is it's been really interesting. Some top performers that are just go-getters are they're not meeting their own expectations, and as we talk from the outside, we see these individuals doing a great job.
Yeah.
And we've even had conversations letting them know they're doing a great job, but they have such high inner drive and expectation that they feel like they're not doing a good job. And I probably fit in this category sometimes. I'm my own worst enemy. I know you do as well.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that for these top performers that really don't feel like they're performing well?
Yeah, I think when you get groups of high achievers and you don't have to set the bar for them. They set a higher bar for themselves than you set for them. And so when which is what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. We've got some people in positions that are executing at a high level, but just not seeing change as fast as they want to see change, right? Or not seeing productivity as fast as they want to see it. And if they were content with the productivity they were seeing, it would bother us. And it would probably mean that they're not the right fit, and they don't have the right culture fit for what we're building. Someone who's content with low execution or subpar execution, would
They're going to be really stressed.
they're
Here.
going to be really stressed
Right.
here, and it's going to stress us, and it's not going to be a great culture fit, right? As we talk about elevated experiences, we talk about a championship mentality. It's okay with losing, right? Is what what we're ultimately talking about. And as you hire achievers and as we promote people into positions inside of our company that want to achieve greatness, that want to win the Super Bowl, you watch Patrick Mahomes throughout the season when they were losing, he was not happy. Travis Kelce was not happy.
Right.
These guys do not want to lose. My 8-year-old was crying after their last basketball game this last weekend because he's like, I hate losing. And I was like, yeah, bud, losing stinks. Like there's just no way around that. But he won the week before with the last minute buzzer shot I was telling you about, and hit the top of the backboard, which is, feel bad for the other team because they don't know the rules yet on that. But anyways, he won the buzzer beater, at the end of the game. Like that winning feeling, like he wants more of that.
Yeah.
And high achievers, you don't even have to set, the bar for them. They want to win. But I think one thing you and I have talked about is, we've got to be conscious of, okay, we've got those people in that position, which is the right fit. But now we need to make sure that they don't beat themselves up every single day, and that they realize that we believe they're doing a good job, and we see the direction that we're headed and we're going the right direction. And as leaders, make sure that we're speaking, into that and encouraging them so that they're not discouraged at, a lack of progress. Because we do see the progress. It just sometimes takes, longer to see the results of what we want, and so, but I think it's been interesting to kind of view achievers and, how they're, when you have those high achievers, I mean, that's exciting times.
Well, I think when you look at the high achievers, they feel the highest of highs and the lowest of lows sometimes, right?
Mhm.
And didn't want him to lose that game,
Yeah.
but losing is important too. I think
Mm.
all winning and all positive messages all the time don't teach you how to deal with adversity and how to
Yeah.
fight back. And my daughter had a similar story with the loss in basketball. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to have those because it's where you get strength. It's where you develop. It's where you find out what you need to work on. Maybe where you weren't as good as you thought,
Yeah.
and keeps that motivation going. So as long as you're disciplined and driven to do that, those losses can be some of the best experiences that you have to truly
Yeah.
move the needle. If you're winning all the time, you're not learning anything
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
So you've got to take those losses and you got to be willing to risk and push the envelope. And so that makes a lot of people uncomfortable sometimes. They like stability and this idea of everything being safe. But
Mm.
our view here in trying to achieve big bold things is we're going to lose sometimes and we're going to learn our lessons and we're going to get better. That
Yeah.
is the message. And confidence comes from no matter what happens, knowing you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Confidence isn't that you're going to win. Confidence is if you don't, you're going to learn, you're going to be better, and you're going to be okay, and you're going to go out there the next time. So
Yeah.
that's a key message for me. But I think what people struggle with a lot that are high achievers too is they don't, in their mind, they don't have a clear definition of success either.
Mm.
Right? It's just better, 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 better. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And I think that's where milestones or having some sort of
Right.
definition for success comes into play,
Yeah.
so that you can understand that and celebrate those moments. And
Yeah.
high achievers don't celebrate a lot
Yeah.
at times, but
It's because they go,
they
go,
get
go,
going,
go. They
right?
keep going to the next one. Yeah.
But you have to have some realistic or reasonable measure to baseline yourself against. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy if you're a high achiever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. When you think about celebrating, we talk a lot about how we need to, just constantly be working on celebrating. How do we set those metrics, or how do we do better at celebrating for those high achievers, do you think?
Well, I think it's something we're working on is really more measurables, right?
Yeah.
Because from a qualitative state, it's hard to know, did you achieve it or
Yeah.
not? It feels good, but did we really get it? So I think some quantitative measurements help kind of put something in clear, or when this happens, smart goals with those things are defined. So that's a lot of it. But I think also it's just that leadership touch. And sometimes you just know, hey, we need to get out and have some fun, or
Right.
or go celebrate a win, or whatever it may be. So
Yeah.
it's something I'm bad about because when I win, I love it for about 30 seconds, and then my hunger is right back in the getting back in the game. So
Yeah. It's the general manager of the Chiefs right now that's just, on to recruiting the next season. And it is important to take that time and celebrate. And so, yeah.
So spring break's coming up here as we wrap up. Got any wild spring break plans?
We don't have any wild spring break plans. You guys doing anything fun?
Not much. We're gonna take a little trip.
Yeah.
Get the kids out of the neighborhood, just for some fresh air and those sorts of things. But no wild spring break trips to Florida or anything. So
Yeah.
I think we'll keep it kind of mild this
Yeah.
year.
'Cause
So
we're going to see the in-laws. That's about it.
ooh,
So, yeah.
could get dicey.
Can be wild.
Yeah,
You never
you never
know.
know what's gonna happen there, so.
That's right.
All right. Well, this has been the Menlo Experience. I'm your host, Brad Stant with Kyle Block. We'll see you next time.
See ya.